Let me tell you who I am first. I'm Curtis Rogers. I'm a physician, clinical geneticist who works with the Greenwood Genetics Center. See Ann back there, Lord knows I've known Ann for a long time.
You and everybody else.
Yeah. Comes with the age that we all are accumulating. I've worked with them over 30 years. I've worked for the Genetics Center, so I'm one of the old guys. That makes me a senior clinical geneticist now. That's kind of hard to swallow, but I also am the president of the board for Indwellings, and I'm going to just throw a plug in. We have a bash coming up for Indwellings this September. Fundraiser, a big party, have a lot of fun, have a band, food, things like that. Paula can give you more information about that. I'll also put in a plug for the Genetics Center. We have a 5K race this Saturday out at Conisty Falls, which is Race the Helix. And that is not as much to raise money, but to raise awareness of the Genetics Center. And some of the families who receive services through the Genetics Center will be there, and you'll know them because they'll have on their team T-shirts with their child's name on those shirts. So just wanted to let you know about those two things. If you need information about the gala, I've got some of that. This is a publication from the Genetics Center called Friends of the Center that we put out 3 or 4 times a year that just gives a little information about the Genetics Center itself. The Genetics Center has been around since 1974. We just had our 40th anniversary, which was, you know, a big deal for us. Started by Dr. Roger Stevenson, who is from South Carolina, as I am. It seems like a lot of us are from South Carolina. We're born and bred. So I wanted to tell you what the Genetics Center does, because it seems to me we're better known in Europe than we are in South Carolina. If I go to Europe and I went to a genetics department, I said, hey, I work for the Greenwood Genetics Center, they'd say, whoa, that's a big deal. Around here, people say, huh? What's that? So we still, after 40 years, have a ways to go as far as getting our name out there. Everything that occurs in your family is not hereditary. This little boy got his black eye from his sister, but that is not genetic, okay? We like to think of ourselves as being the whiz kids of medicine, and this slide, this little cartoon is just talking about if genetics was easy, Einstein would have been a geneticist. He stuck to physics. So. And many of you may or may not know that in 2002-2003 we finished mapping the human genome. The federal government allotted $1 per base pair of DNA. We all have about 3 billion base pairs of DNA in each of our cells. So for $3 billion, starting in 1990, that money was dedicated over 15 years. It is the only federal project that I know that came in under budget and ahead of time. And instead of 15 years and 12 to 13 years that was done. Everybody thought, oh great, we've mapped the human genome. Well, all that tells you is what order the letters are in, and there are only 4 letters in your genetic alphabet, A, T, G, and C. There wasn't any punctuation in those letters, and there certainly weren't any indentations for paragraphs. So we still, 10 to 15 years later, have a lot of work to do to understand this. I just saw a little boy this morning who lives in Cherokee County who has severe motor weakness and a muscle weakness and motor delays, and he has an alteration in a gene that I had never heard of until we found it in this little book. So the neat thing about my job is I get to learn every day. I get to do something that stimulates me academically, but also has the opportunity to help someone understand what's going on with their child. After telling this mom about this gene and the disorder, she thanked me. I'm going to tell you, he has a progressive disorder. He's already non-ambulatory. I'm concerned that over the next few years he's going to be so weak he can't breathe. But his mom would rather have that information and know what she's going to be facing rather than being in the dark. And I think that's true for almost all parents. This touch screen is so cool. Now I'm loving these. I gotta get this. This is our main genetic center down in Greenwood. Why the heck is it in Greenwood? What's in Greenwood? Well, the Self Foundation was in Greenwood, and the money there allowed the genetic center in its formative stages, along with South Carolina Department of Disabilities and Special Needs, to put together a world-class genetic center. This is the original building. Oh, no.
Hey, I got that screen now.
Yeah, that's bad.
You can use it on the top, the arrows,
Aha.
to go backward.
Okay. Well, good.
Sometimes it's on here.
Oh, okay. So, anyway, the original building was our lab, then we added a clinic building. I used to work in this building before I moved to Columbia and then to Greenville. And I did not touch that then. Boy, this thing is picky. That is this building, which is what I was pointing to, is our new clinical building, our treatment center. So our clinical laboratories are housed in this building. And you can think of clinical as the tests we can get paid for, okay? That insurance will reimburse us for, and patients are also seen in this building. Not nearly as many as are seen in the building where I am here in Greenwood, because we see more patients in this building than any other center or satellite clinic that the genetic center has. We are by far the busiest. We have 3 clinicians in this building. We have several genetic counselors, administrative staff. We even have a PhD molecular geneticist there who is there to help us answer questions. And she does a lot of her work on computer, but she is the whole exome sequence goddess. And so the goddess interprets all this data for us, and she's the one who found the change in the gene for this young man who is at my office today. So we serve patients. We receive a significant proportion of our budget through the state, through the South Carolina Department of Disabilities and Special Needs. Your tax money at work, whether you like it or not. We then have private billing for clinical and laboratory services, other federal and state grants, and fundraising that we do. We have PhDs, MDs, genetic counselors, and a lot of other people. We started, and I go back a long ways, we started with probably, when I came on board, we probably had 10 people. We have over 160 employees scattered around the state. That guy, in case you're wondering, is Gregor Mendel. He's the monk who did the peas. He's kind of the father of single gene genetics. And if you go to our Greenwood location, we are located on Gregor Mendel Circle. If you build the first building, you get to name the road. So this just tells you a little bit about what we do. We provide clinical genetic services and laboratory testing, educational programs. If you're at high school, you may have seen our Gene Machine recreational vehicle pull up. It's a mobile laboratory that provides education for biology classes in high school. Our goal with that is to make people more aware of the genetic center and genetics, and hopefully we get 1 or 2 of those people interested in going into genetics, and they will be our future employees. So we're out there recruiting all the time. And we do a lot of research. We are one of the leading research centers in the world concerning intellectual disability. And we specialize in the X chromosome. But we've also started a treatment program now. We also are basically the go-to place for our metabolic program in the state. So when your child has a newborn screen, they stick their heel, they leave the hospital, you get a report back, you have a newborn metabolic screen that has over 30 tests on it. If there's an abnormality there, you're going to get plugged into the genetic center, and we're going to be the ones following up with your child through that state program. This is just showing where our offices are. Here we are in Greenville. This is Greenwood, Columbia, Florence. We don't have a clinical geneticist there. We're still trying to hire somebody there. I'm from that area and I don't want to go back. So. and North Charleston. So we're all over the state. We have metastasized, as I like to say. And we have clinics in those places. We also have other outreach clinics. We cut down a lot on our outreach clinics because, one, the show rate wasn't that good, and two, most of the families were already coming to Greenville or to Columbia or Charleston to see other specialists in pediatric neurology or cardiology or gastroenterology or whatever. So it's we're much more efficient seeing patients in our office than we are at outlying clinics. We still have some team clinics though. We have craniofacial teams here in Greenville and Spartanburg. We have a Muscular Dystrophy Association clinic that meets in Spartanburg monthly. We have a Shriners Genetics clinic that meets monthly, and we have a tone management clinic that meets at Shriners for kids most of whom have spasticity, and manage those kids. And I'm the geneticist for all of those. I don't know how that happened. I'm not sure how I got stuck there. So who comes? Inherited disorders of any type or family history of an inherited disorder. So they don't have to be affected. They can come just because of their family history. We see a lot of kids in the newborn nursery and intensive care nursery who have birth defects of various kinds. Couples who have had an abnormal ultrasound. We are involved with the maternal fetal medicine programs in Greenville, and we have genetic counselors there who provide counseling for those couples. We see those babies once they're born for follow-up. We do have some research going on. I mentioned that in a little bit. We're big into autism and doing research in autism, and looking at the metabolic profile of folks who have autism. That's one of our big projects, trying to determine if there's a common pathway that a child goes through at 12 to 18 months, something through this common pathway, whatever the cause, leads to the development of autism. And I think we're getting there. So, clinical and research focus, birth defects. We started the neural tube defect project in this state. It's one of the 5 in the country, funded by the CDC. So we have that. We have a birth defects registry now. We do a lot of work in intellectual disability and autism. I told you where the money comes from. We're also involved in family support groups and have helped several of those start both locally and nationally and internationally, helping support groups get started. We have a huge, very active Down syndrome group here in Greenville. I talked to a mom yesterday who has a child with Down syndrome. She's in Oconee County, and she and some of her friends who have a child with intellectual disability have started a local group in Oconee, not just for Down syndrome, but for any child that has autism or intellectual disability, as just a family get-together type of thing. Education division, I mentioned the gene machine, and I'm telling you, this is quite the machine, and we send our staff with that the RV out, and they actually hold class inside this RV and isolate DNA and do some things like that. Boy, you can even pump your hands and make it show. There's the gene machine. And some of the folks inside the gene machine doing their thing. So, one of our new projects is a Center for Translational Research. Because having all this knowledge and knowing what's causing something, well, that's information for the parents. But what we would rather do is take that information and impact the care and treatment of that individual. And so we're trying to translate that basic science knowledge into clinical applications that will manifest itself in treatment for an affected individual. So, we are trying to be on the cutting edge of developing new treatments. That means we're going to have to work with drug companies who are developing drugs, because I hate to tell you, but that's where the money is. And the drug companies are the ones that are going to come to you and ask you to participate in a study, help find individuals to participate in that study. The benefit for the families is their child's going to get treatment, and if that treatment is indeed successful, many times what happens is the drug company is going to continue their child on that treatment on a compassionate basis until that medication is approved by the FDA and is available commercially. So you have the opportunity for your child to have a major benefit at no cost to you or your family. We emphasize neurodevelopmental disorders. That's how we started, and that's where we've stayed all along. We've added in birth defects, but our big thing is autism and intellectual disability. We're trying to partner with other institutions and industry and figure these things out. Their goals: design and implement drug trials, develop biomarkers, which means a test we can use to determine who is either affected or if the treatment is being effective in that individual. So what you're looking for is this metabolic change. And if we can do that for autism, that would make things much easier for us to treat, because we would have a marker. And again, we're working on this metabolomic profile, and it appears tryptophan is the buzzword at our center. And metabolism of tryptophan appears to be different, at least in younger children who have autism, than it is in a child without autism. So, if we can get a profile of what a typical child is, a child with autism, and there's this much difference, we can give a medication and we can bring that profile closer to what the typical profile is metabolically. And at the same time, obviously, chemicals don't mean a lot if we're not seeing an improvement clinically in the child, and correlate those two. It may give us the opportunity to much more rapidly select and target drugs that may be helpful in autism. And don't think autism is caused by the same thing. There are 1,000 genes and environmental factors, and we're not going to see a drug that's going to help everybody with autism, but we're certainly trying to get there. Natural history studies, you don't know whether you're doing any good if you don't know what the natural history of a condition is. So if that causes neurologic deterioration over 10 years, how fast is that deterioration? Sometimes a treatment doesn't get you to stay like this. Sometimes it just changes your slope so you're not deteriorating as quickly. And that's okay. The federal government will approve those drugs. Conduct drug discovery, as I was talking about, and develop genetic-based therapies. And we're talking about, yes, changing your genetic makeup, putting genes in way to correct genes that are not functioning properly, which lead to a dysfunctional protein. These are the current studies. You may know what Rett syndrome is. Okay. X-linked condition, but typically affects only females as opposed to most X-linked conditions that affect only males. But Rett syndrome is caused by a change in a gene called MECP2, very important regulatory gene in the body. If a male has dysfunction of that Rett syndrome gene, those males usually die because that is so devastating to a male, because a male has an X and a Y, whereas females have two X's. That extra X in a female provides them some protection that way. But we're working through this trial. MECP duplication is just the opposite of Rett syndrome. Rett syndrome is dysfunction of the gene. MECP2 duplication is having an extra copy of that gene. Typically doesn't cause a problem in females, but causes a problem in males who have a picture that's really similar to Rett syndrome in that sense. They have a neurodegenerative process. So that tells you that gene is very important to be at the correct dosage in your brain for your brain to function properly. Too much, bad; too little, bad. Okay? There are other Rett syndrome related disorders caused by different genes. There are several of those that are now present. We're trying to figure those out and what the natural history is. And then we've done a tremendous amount of work in Fragile X syndrome, which is the most common inherited cause of intellectual disability. It is always inherited. I've never seen a boy who's affected with Fragile X syndrome whose mom was not a carrier. Okay? So we look for that a lot. We don't find it as much as we used to, I think, because we found a lot of the folks with Fragile X syndrome. I will stop right there and let you guys ask any questions. These are just the causes of intellectual disabilities. We do research like this too and monitor this, because there's no way you're going to positively impact treatment with intellectual disabilities if you don't know what the cause is. So we constantly monitor what the cause is, and this is all in our mega computer at the Genetics Center, and it can spit out a list anytime we want it to. So I'll be glad to answer any questions about Genetics Center or indwellings.
I don't really have a question, but I do want to make a comment. I taught biology back in the middle 70s and the 80s. I retired in 92. I knew about the center, but I got to genetics when I taught my advanced placement and my regular biology. I always had someone to come to my classes to talk, and it was just very good for the students. I wish that you had that bus when I was I retired in 92, and hearing you talk, it makes me want to go back. Yes.
We still have a counselor or a physician that will go out every now and then, but most of that has been replaced by our professional educators who take the van out and actually do that hands-on laboratory stuff with the students.
I was there now so I could take advantage of that.
You know, being a teacher, students really get into getting their hands on things and working with their own DNA.
We were just getting into DNA back in the...
Right.
But there was something I wanted to know. Do you collaborate any with the Seventh Hand Research Center in Greenwood?
I have not heard of anything like that, so maybe that's a place we need to apply for a grant.
Yes.
We may need to write a grant to them to see if we can get some money. I'll have to mention that to our grant people.
Yes, we'll do that.
Yes, ma'am. Eric.
You mentioned a couple slides back that you get involved when a child is born with a birth defect or an abnormality. Does the family have to initiate that contact?
Sometimes the family does, but many times that is either from the neonatologist in the NICU, or that is from their primary care physician, or they may get referred back to us by their primary care physician or their pulmonologist, cardiologist, whatever. We take all comers. Although I'm trained in pediatrics and then genetics, I am very much the generalist, because DNA is in every cell in the body, so we have to be generous. And we are also, as I like to say, we provide care from womb to tomb. Because we're there prenatally and we're there whatever that family is going through with that individual who's affected. Yes, sir.
I know they have swab tests now for Fragile X, where you can actually test for the genetic markers. Is that anything on the horizon you guys are seeing for autism, or is that spectrum too large to be able to?
Well, I think because of the number of genes, that's why we went to this metabolic profile, and that's done on blood. We are experimenting with being able to do that on a dry blood spot, which is what you get in a newborn screen. Now, how reliable that is going to be in a newborn, I'm not sure, because something changes. For those of us who see a lot of kids who have autism, something changes, because many times that child was developing typically until 12 to 18 months, which is how immunizations got involved in this, because there are a lot of shots given them, but that's not it. In spite of what Robert De Niro says, because he's an idiot. And I will tell him that to his face, but like some of his movies, but don't talk about science. Because of that, what's happening at 12 to 18 months in the brain from a biochemical standpoint that leads to the development of autism? And again, since there's so many causes, our autism gene panel has over 90 genes on it, and that's just touching the surface of genes that are involved in autism. So we chose to go the other route and see if we could find that common pathway to aid in diagnosis, so that when a child comes in and has an MCHAT or whatever, and that MCHAT is positive for autism at that pediatrician's office at 18 to 24 months, maybe we order this autism metabolic profile, and then that says, yes, this child is at very high risk. This is the pattern we see 85% of the time in kids with younger kids with autism age 3 to 6. Then that's another checkbox, and so then it'll make it easier to access services for that child, and then hopefully find treatments, medical treatments for autism. Yes, ma'am.
I have two questions, please, quickly. My son with ID, he's already been diagnosed. Are you saying that a genetic test would be beneficial in some
He's been
aspect?
diagnosed with ID.
Yes.
Okay. See, I don't call that a diagnosis.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I don't call-
He has ID.
I call autism and intellectual disability descriptions of your neurodevelopmental status at that point.
Okay.
Okay? A diagnosis to me is if I came in and said, oh, your daughter has intellectual disability due to Rett syndrome
Okay.
because she has a mutation in the MECP2 gene. That's a diagnosis
Okay.
to me.
So,
Down syndrome is a diagnosis.
yes.
All kids with Down syndrome have intellectual disability. Again, that's not a diagnosis to me, that's a description. You could just as well be saying pink with green polka dots. I want to know why you're pink with green polka dots.
Okay, and that was
That's what geneticists
that was
are
my
into.
question. So, genetic testing or profile, whatever you call it, may be
If
beneficial?
if he has not been seen by a geneticist or has not been seen in a long time, we have new tests, and we
Okay.
probably need to see him. And I'm not going to tell you that it will lead to any difference in his
Certainly.
educational or medical management, but it may answer a question for you as well as for your other two children about what recurrence risk might be.
Certainly. And fetal alcohol syndrome, is that something that I've been told that Greenwood Genetic Center is?
We look for that every time we see a child with intellectual disability or a developmental delay. But the kids that you can recognize with the clinical facial features of fetal alcohol syndrome are the tip of the iceberg. that's 10% or less of the kids that are affected by prenatal alcohol exposure. And therein lies the problem, which is why when you go to the classroom, my daughter was a third grade teacher, she's now a reading specialist, but that's why when you go to the classroom, there may be some kids in there who are wild as a buck. They have ADHD from Hades, and there's no way for us to prove that. There's no genetic test or biochemical test or any test you can do to diagnose alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder. We are reliant upon the history that a parent would give, saying, yes, I used a lot of alcohol during the pregnancy. That history is not real reliable. I'll believe it if you said you did. I'm not sure I believe it if you said you didn't. Because I can go to the OB clinic and I can quiz mothers there who are pregnant, and I can say, how many of you think alcohol will damage your unborn child? I guarantee you 95% plus raise some hand. Then if I say, let's be honest, ladies, how many of you are now drinking alcohol in this current pregnancy? And I'm probably going to get 25 to 40% to raise their hand. When they did a study in my neck of the woods, in the PD area in Florence, they found that over 25% of the pregnancies were exposed to either a medication or an unprescribed drug or alcohol in their pregnancy. So that's totally preventable theoretically, but that's a major problem. And depending on where you are, lower income individuals are more likely to have used drugs and alcohol. Fetal alcohol syndrome was described on a Native American reservation because there were so many kids born with this typical facial appearance and developmental delays that once the geneticists got on the reservation, it was quite obvious something was going on.
You do not have to have the birth mother, any information from her in an adopted situation?
No,
Okay.
no. We're going to base that on what we see, but the problem is you don't see a whole lot of times, and that does not mean that mother's drinking did not cause a problem in brain development and ongoing brain function.
Y'all,